So our next panel will provide recommendations on how to effectively conduct a wide range of operating practices in timely and cost-effective manners, including housekeeping, maintenance, grain storage, and minimizing fugitive dust emissions. This session will be moderated by Brad Perry, Facility Engineering Manager for Scoular Company based in Omaha. Our panelists include Matt Richardson, EHS Director for Cargill based in Omaha, Jeff Jones, Vice President of Operations for MKC based in Mound Ridge, Kansas, and Chuck Kunisch, who serves as Safety Director for Michigan Agriculture Commodities based in Marlette, Michigan. Please welcome our panelists.
Thanks for coming, everyone. We're going to do this a little bit format of Q&A type session with the primary topics looking at housekeeping, grain storage, and then DHAs will be kind of the primary opening topics, and then we'll be open for any other ones going forward. But we'll start with Matt on housekeeping.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe just a quick introduction. So again, I'm Matt Richardson. I'm with Cargill. I'm an EHS director for them. Been with Cargill 25 years, so been around the industry, seen a lot of things change over the last 25 years for sure. 18 of those years was spent in the plant operations space, specifically in our grain business. So whether it was a plant manager role, regional operations leader type roles, I did that most of my career. I got into the EHS space about 7 years ago. Have really enjoyed it. I mean, I think hopefully I bring an operational perspective to our EHS team. People have asked me why I switched from operations to EHS, and I think I can look back on my career and I can easily see this correlation between strong safety cultures at a plant and their performance in other areas. So strong safety cultures where teams are engaged, they've got good leading indicators, they've got proactive activities, they've got good safety results. At the end of the day, those were the same facilities that were the most profitable, the most efficient, had the best customer service, in our business. So I think there was a clear correlation, and so it was a good fit for me in my career. And so what we want to talk about today, I think, it's really kind of a broad topic, grain elevator operations. We could go a lot of different directions. So as Brad said, we're going to start with kind of housekeeping and just some notes that I put together, and we'll let the other panelists kind of speak up too, and any questions or thoughts that you have. So first, when we think about housekeeping, it may seem really simple. In a lot of cases, it really is. Unfortunately, we find lots of cases, at least I do in our business, where we've still got opportunities in this space. So first and foremost, one, it is regulatory, right? So OSHA requires us to have a housekeeping program. It's part of the grain handling standard. We've got to have a program, determining the frequency and the method for how we're doing cleaning. Identify priority areas. So OSHA's got some things called out specifically, but identifying those priority areas and ensuring that we maintain less than 1/8 inch of dust. So does anybody know how much 1/8 of an inch of dust is if you just walk around and look at the facility? It's kind of hard to tell, right? And so kind of a rule of thumb that we use is if you can't see the kind of indentation of the nameplate on a piece of equipment, it's probably over 1/8 of an inch of dust that needs to get cleaned. And so that's just a rule or kind of a tip we use. It's not a perfect measurement, obviously, but it's one that we use. Also, OSHA requires and blowdown requirements that you shut down equipment. So in Cargill, we're going to lock out equipment whenever we do a blowdown. Again, you want to make sure that equipment can't inadvertently start up and subsequently cause an explosion. I'd also add, so one of the things, again, in my 25 years, when I started with Cargill, we talked a lot about housekeeping, and housekeeping being one of those things that was critically important to prevent explosions. As time has gone on and we've added more things into our programs, housekeeping's become a big part of our food safety programs too, right? So to keep bugs out, keep rodents out, things like that. I think we've tried really hard to make sure people still understand kind of the priority of housekeeping is to prevent that dust explosion, right? Food safety is important. I'm not saying it's certainly not, but really why we do housekeeping is to prevent that explosion from happening. So a few things I jotted down here in terms of kind of just elements of a housekeeping plan. So one, determine the frequency. So how often are you going to do that inspection? In Cargill, we document that weekly. So we do a documented weekly housekeeping inspection. But at the same time, we're asking our employees as they're going around the facility to find cases where we've got housekeeping problems, right? So we need people out in the field, out inspecting tunnels, boot pits, head houses, tunnels, everything that, again, making sure that we've got the right frequency of housekeeping. So one is the inspection frequency. Two is the frequency of cleaning. So that may vary a little bit. So you may find that, you've got a really good sealed part of your plant, maybe a part of your plant that's not used very often that you don't need to clean as often, but determining that frequency of cleaning is important. Establishing an accumulation limit. So I talked about the OSHA requirement of 1/8 of an inch. You don't want to let it get to that 1/8 of an inch, right? At that point, it's too late. You really should have cleaned it already. You really probably should shut the facility down to clean that part of the plant. And so what we use is kind of a 1/32 of an inch, and kind of the rule of thumb we use here is if you can't see the color of the paint on the equipment, you probably reached that 1/32 of an inch. Next is outlining cleaning methods and tools. Again, this can be something as simple as brooms, sweeping, hand brushes, blow down, maybe you pressure wash a couple times a year, those kinds of things. PPE required. In Cargill, when we do blowdowns, we require respiratory protection. That's part of our program requirements, is that when we blow down, you would wear a respirator. Documentation, so certainly if you have done it, you want to document it. I mean, we've heard the proverbial, if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. And so making sure you document it and that you're training your people. So just a couple of tips I thought about here as we were putting this together. So first, and I find this all the time in our plants where we've got the floor, maybe we've got the conveyor clean, but we missed kind of the stuff above. So thinking about ductwork, conduit, lighting fixtures, all those types of things that may be above that we sometimes forget about when we clean. Look for dust and accumulation of dust or product coming out of a piece of equipment. How many times have we seen some of that where you can see dust blowing out of a hole in a piece of equipment, or you see a pile of grain below something. I would add too, and this is something that's just been kind of recent in Cargill, and I can think of 3 incidents in the last probably 4 years where we've tried to patch a piece of equipment while it was running, and guess what happened, right? We didn't understand kind of how thin that metal was. Somebody goes to kind of inspect that hole that might be in a conveyor. All of a sudden, they push their finger through it and end up having an injury. Fortunately, we haven't had an amputation, but I mean, we were just lucky, quite honestly. Then maybe the last tip, and I'll turn it over to these guys to see what else they would add from their perspective, but just address spills quickly. I mean, I can think of cases where I've been in some boot pits where it's been wet and it's been mucky and the dust has been down there for a long time, the grain's been down there for a long time, and those people want to go home at lunchtime and change their clothes, right? So if you clean it up while it's still nice and loose and fresh, it's easier to do that. You can easily identify the issue and then fix it. So there's just a couple of things that I had here on housekeeping. We'll see if these guys have anything else they want to add.
I think one thing too we've done that, Matt did a nice job of covering that. We've really went into a lot of our older facilities within a cooperative. We have some newer greenfield sites, but we have a lot of older houses as well, country houses, country elevators. And we've worked really hard at pressurizing some of those boot pits. Is there a lot of people doing that within this room here? And raise your hand. A few of you here and there. Yeah, it's been a fantastic opportunity for us at the older houses to be able to do that. There's a couple keys to doing that. You really have to do some planning on that. You have to do some boarding up and doing a few things to make sure you can get that tight enough to get some pressure in there. Depending on the size of the tunnel that you're trying to affect in the boot pit, you might have a 0.5 horsepower motor up to a 5 horsepower motor. we've had to go on those fans. So, but it's been a great opportunity for us to actually utilize that. Our grain quality manager, Tracy Spencer, had brought that to our attention, and we've just really had good luck with doing that. So if that's something you haven't looked into, might be an opportunity for some of you guys to look into that, talk to your millwrights about that. It's been a perfect plan on housekeeping for us as well, too.
Jeff, do you know how many inches of static pressure you need?
I don't know right off my hand. You always ask the smart kid questions, and I'm not that person, but I appreciate that.
Well, that's one question, so.
You got one left. But no, I think Matt hit on logging your housekeeping. I think that's important. Housekeeping is not something that you just hire the guy to come in and push the broom anymore. I think that's probably been a pretty common practice. You start, here's your broom, start here, we show you what to do when you're done, your break's here in 2 hours, and your lunch is at noon. I mean, it's extremely important for us to train on the most simplest task in the elevator. I don't really know how it can get much easier than honestly pushing a broom or using a brush, but we seem to fail at that a lot when you walk through some of these older elevators. So we have to monitor their work through a log sheet, and you need to have specific log sheets, not just housekeeping for the elevator. Let's talk about the different floors, let's talk about the head house, let's talk about the boot pit. Let's make sure that we're logging each one of those separately and specifically when we're doing that job as well.
I would maybe just quickly add, be relentless at finding the cause of that leak or cause of that dust. It's frustrating for our employees when they continue to have to go clean the same thing every day or everything, the same week or whatever it may be. And so, plants that I've been in, again, where those people are relentless at finding those leaks and getting them fixed, their engagement is higher. They can focus on kind of the bigger things of serving our customer. And so it can be a big deal.
I agree with that, Matt, and I think at some point, especially facilities, could be large or old ones that have open belts that are always going to be dusty. When you start them up, you can have everything cleaned, and that as a company, you need to figure out a plan to replace those with covered drags or covered belts, because if not, you're going to have to get that guy out there and train him how to push a broom every time, and eventually at some point it might get down in the middle of loading a train when you go over that 8-inch that you've got to shut down. So I know we had a facility that had under a couple of 4-foot belts under domes, and it was the dustiest place in the world when we were unloading, especially we stored sugar beet pellets that are very explosive too. And we ended up spending, and that was 10 years ago, $500,000 to replace those belts to do nothing other than control the dust. And for me, it was one of the hardest projects to get done from our company to explain why you want to spend $500,000 that's not going to improve your productivity. But it was the right thing to do. Tunnels are safe now. Tunnels are clean. It was the right thing to do, but you can't do it all at once, so you want to start a plan to work at those and replace those. And we all know that OSHA isn't going to get any less stringent, so it's going to come. And then as I talk later about the DHAs, that's going to make part of that program easier too.
You guys have any programs or systems you guys use for documenting your housekeeping?
Quite frankly, we still use a paper copy. We do have some inspections that we're doing online now, but our housekeeping generally is done on a piece of paper. We try to keep it simple. Again, keep it straightforward where again, it's just simple for people to do.
We have same thing, like we have a book that we put by the time computer where they punch in and punch out and get everybody, they're going to be by that, and they're going to, so when they're punching out on their time, they write down what they did that day, but then all those records are downloaded onto safety recording computer. We have our safety programs and everything that are on there, and those are all downloaded and stored for perpetuality. And it's really worked when we had an incident here a couple months ago, and OSHA came out and we could pull all those records right up right in front of them rather than fish around and look for them. It really helps. The more efficient you are at giving them information, the better off you are.
Stepping away from the just high priority areas for a second, what about property appearance and housekeeping around your facility? How do you guys think about that for like when you have an insurance person or an OSHA rep show up to your site and what they can expect?
Yeah, I'll take that one to start with. You know, MKC has 4 keys: safety, courtesy, image, and innovation. We believe that we live by those 4 keys. Of course, safety is first, courtesy for your customer, internal and external, and then, of course, image. When you come to MKC, we want you to look at us, and I want to look at it through the eyes of a farmer owner, one of our farmers that owns us. We're farmer owned, as you guys know, in a cooperative system. So when you come on site, image is important for us to, it shows what your boot pits look like. It shows how you run your facilities and what to expect when you come to MKC. So we do have weed management programs, just like we have programs internally where we'll utilize pre-emergence and post-emergence to actively address weed issues throughout the facility itself. You know, there's a broom outside and a rake and a shovel at all times too. I think it's important. Matt talked about spills internally, how much easier it is to clean those up and document that and take care of those before you go home at night. If you've got a little pile of corn or something in gravel or soybeans or something like that, I mean, maybe it's some treated wheat or something. Those are things that you don't want to leave actively on the ground overnight. So we monitor that pretty regularly. We do audits. We do monthly audits. We do image audits. We have an organization, within our organization, we have a committee called the MKC Way, and you're actually graded by your peers. So a couple people on that committee will go out and do an audit on facilities that aren't theirs. They're not under their auspice. And they'll give you a real life, real world score on what you're doing. I mean, are your employee shirts tucked in? I mean, that's something a little bit different here. We're talking about housekeeping, but is your bathroom clean? We talked about that all 4. If there's nothing worse than going into a country elevator and the trash isn't dumped. I mean, how simple is that? You know, Brad and I talked about that one for a few minutes there. How simple is it just to clean the bathroom a couple times a week? So yeah, housekeeping just does not mean inside your elevator. It's your property. It's your business as well too. So I think creating some active programs to focus on that, some audits, and being actively involved in that is extremely important if you're not doing that.
I agree with that, Jeff, and we're privately owned, so we have an owner that comes and looks at our facilities, and I want it to look nice for him too, and I think there's some more reasons. I think if you get that facility so it looks good, employees will start taking pride in it. I could never understand, as I looked at some farm operations, how people could get up and go to work in that hole that day. And, you know, to take some time and clean it up, it starts making esprit de corps. They start feeling better about it, the whole facility. And you'll see that all the way through in the safety programs and in housekeeping in the facilities everywhere. It's just to take pride in that facility. And like the group that was here in front of us also, around the bins, the weeds, if you aren't controlling those weeds, like you said, with sprays and stuff, that's a great harborage for insects too. So there's many levels more than just having the trash cleaned up, why it's a good idea to do that. And you have to work at it. It's amazing how guys will just get used to walking over crap laying on the ground. And, you know, you point it out to them and they're like, oh yeah, I'll pick that up, but they can walk over it and not see it. So it takes a while, and you have to, when you're out in your facility, if you're walking along and there's an old pop bottle that fell, or plastic that fell out of a truck, you need to bend over and pick it up. That you need to have your employees see you pick that up. And by example, they'll go, well, gee, I guess if he can pick it up, I can too. You know, you can't just go tell somebody to pick all that up. You got to show them that it's important to you.
Well, I think also on that too, I mean, if you've got nitrile gloves laying out on the ground or a dust mask, those are no-nos. I mean, OSHA walks on the facility that day, they can write you on that. So I think we need to pay attention to those types of things. You know, it's not just a pop bottle. If you see things out there, I know it's gross to pick up somebody's dust mask. Well, put on your leather gloves that we bought you the 13th pair this month, and pick that up for you if you would. Everybody laughs at that. It sounds like you all buy a lot of gloves too. So, but seriously, that's a great point you brought up, and it is not just a pop bottle. It is paying attention to things we use, PPE, that is not in its proper spot. So.
And I know like our employees before, they would hate it like if our safety inspector would come around and write down that he saw a dead bird or a dead mouse or a dead rat, and he didn't pick it up. You know, that he just expected that the report, he was going to write the report, and somebody else was going to come pick it up, and that just bugged the living daylights out of our operations guys. So yeah, it's a dead rat. Go get the nitrile glove that somebody's left laying around or whatever, and pick it up and get rid of it. Do it yourself. Do it by example again. Let them see that you want to have that facility looking nice.
I think that's a great example. I mean, I've walked around a lot of facilities, and I love it when you can see a manager go out there and see a piece of trash and pick it up. I mean, the example that, you know, sets for the rest of the team there it's just invaluable. And so it really sets the tone.
Anyone have any questions for the group? Well, maybe I'll do one first then. Any items that you guys look at as like black clouds at facilities? Matt, you mentioned earlier about being able to find the source of the mess and clean it up real quickly. Earlier, Jeff, we were talking about working in tunnels and less than ideal situations and adding ventilation through the tunnel so it's not just stale air down there, or adding lighting. Any recommendations or things you guys have done at your facilities to kind of take some of the suck factor out of working in the facilities?
I think Jeff touched on one earlier, just on pressurization fans. So we've done a lot of that work over the years, and you know, just dries the facility out, dries that old wet boot pit out, helps keep the dust in sometimes that wants to come out. So it helps maybe just in some of the fugitive dust that you get in those facilities. It just makes it easier to go down and do that kind of work.
You know, I'll talk on something totally different here. I think one thing that we've done well at MKC is, you know, we value you as the person. We value you as what you bring to the game each day. And we've put regular broom pushers in charge of a safety aspect or a labor aspect, for lack of a better word, some task that they can own. And we give them the opportunity. Maybe that's every morning toolbox talk. For 5 or 10 minutes, you're the boss. You own it. You get to talk to people and talk to them a little bit about safety and why it's important for you to go home with all your toes and fingers and see your family that night. So I think that's important that we've empowered people. I mean, it's a little bit off the base, but there is a black cloud out there that we think that sometimes those young employees, those people that maybe have been there 25 years and we feel like, oh my gosh, they just want to go hide and don't want to be part of this. Challenge those folks. Give those people opportunity. That's how they feel part of a team. And that's what we value at MKC, is the teamwork part of it. Everybody's the same, working together. Everybody picks up the glove. Except the dead rat. I pass on the rat, but I'll do it if I...
Matt, you mentioned that you require your employees to wear respirators when doing housekeeping. Do you fit test and medically evaluate everybody, and do you make them shave then?
So that's a great question. So yes and yes, right? So we do. So part of our program is, you know, within our respiratory program, we've got a certain number of tasks that are respirator required tasks. And so within that, we train, fit test, require clean shaven. We do have the PAPR type mask that we use too, that prevents some of the issues that you get with shaving. But yeah, we do follow those regulations for that. Good question though. I mean, and that's a challenge. I mean, it's always been a challenge when we even fit test about clean shaven and some of that we, and I'll tell you, we don't have the perfect answer for it because it's hard, right? Yeah, no, I get that. It can be difficult.
Yeah, quick question for you. So I do the safety inspections for the grain elevators for our company. And one thing I notice is once we have some turnover, maybe a new manager and maybe some turnover, have almost all new employees on there. When you set the goal of creating a new safety culture specific to housekeeping, in your opinion or your experiences, how much time does that take?
Yeah, no, I'll talk a little bit on it. We have some turnover and things that do happen out in the country at country elevators, and it's not something that most people are used to coming in. For lack of a better word, Brad, your suck factor, that's Brad's phrase there. It's not fun. So learning something not fun sometimes takes a little bit longer, a little more convincing. So, I think we've worked hard at providing somewhat of a peer program. And we have defined leaders within our group that are just great at developing talent. And they're great at standing right beside you as we sweep, as we clean, as we do some of those bucketing jobs and things like that. And I think that's important for that aspect of it, but it's going to take a couple months for you to understand, and the key to that is to follow up. If my peer comes back around every week and makes sure that it becomes important to him, I think that's important for training, but it's not something you learn and I think you're actively doing in just a day or two. I think there comes some follow-up on that. I mean, I would say within a month or two, you ought to have that under control, because it's one of the most important things we do, because it's one of the most dangerous aspects we have with the dust in a facility. So, anybody else? I mean...
Well, I think it's really important, if it's a new facility manager, he's going to be the one that daily teaches it to his new employees too. Yeah. And so that facility manager has to hear it all the way up the line, from his direct supervisor, from any management, from any ownership. It has to be talked about constantly. So, not just random things, but so he understands that culture of that company, that is very important. He has to believe it, that it's just not rhetoric. Yeah. And then once you turn him and he really buys in, then he can drive it with the rest of his employees. But it just can't be, hope that it's going to happen. It has to be a program to make it happen. And everybody has to believe it, not just give lip service to it.
I think these guys answered it really well. I mean, the only thing I'd add is kind of maybe philosophically, you got to start somewhere, right? And it kind of depends on where you're at, but one of the things we've been talking a lot about in Cargill is not normalizing deficiencies, right? So if we get comfortable that always leaks and we never address it, we've kind of normalized it, we accept it, and that's just the way it is. And at some point in time, you got to put a stake in the ground and say, we're going to change that. And so similar with anything that you do, just normalizing some of those deficiencies, you got to start small in some cases to start to kind of build the momentum.
And then I believe this type of meeting helps a lot. Maybe those newer managers or whatever, get them out maybe more than you normally would. Get them here to see that they're not just company peers, but their industry peers really believe in it and how important it is. I know when I got on the Jess's group, the Safety, Health, and Environmental Quality for NGFA, and all of a sudden I was sitting there with all the big boys and hearing how important it was to them. It changes your attitude. You think about it, that you understand that is an issue of the industry and you aren't alone at it, and there's people that'll help you with it.
Other questions? If not, maybe it's the right time, Jeff, to switch over to grain storage and maintenance.
Good, okay. Jeff Jones, Vice President of Operations for MKC. We're a cooperative in the state of Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas now. We have about 55 locations or so, and we have almost 500 employees. So I'm in charge of half of the operations for our company, and my peer does the northern half. I also oversee our 2 current rail loaders, terminals, and building the third one as we speak right now. So that's a little bit about me. Maintenance-wise, I think MKC is probably a little bit different. We have an internal millwright crew, so I think that's important. We have a gentleman, John Brown, that's in charge of those folks. He's a director of facilities. He also works a lot on any greenfield facilities that we're going to build and design and planning on that. So I think it starts there. We have a culture, and I've talked about culture before, but I think all these things are culturally based. I think it's how you focus on what you bring to the game, and maintenance is important to us. I mean, it's not right there at safety. That's number one, as we talked about, but it's a huge part of that. So I'll talk a little bit about preventative maintenance and pre and post harvest maintenance here in a second, but I think you need to have some type of form of or the ability to do work orders per se. We treat our millwright crew like a separate business unit. They actually charge us. They actually internally charge us on our P&L for the services they come and perform. And they are spread out. There's 9 of them. They all have vehicles. They all have the equipment. If it's any type of other vendor that had come on site, I mean, they are professional millwrights. So that's a nice plus for us to have those folks to be able to come and do that. So we have a program called Zendesk that we put our tickets, our work orders into. No matter how bad or simple or difficult you think it may be, our director of facilities or our millwright manager actually determines, is that a 1, 2, 3? Because we all know as operations people, everything's a 1, right? So everything is an emergency, gotta have it by 8 o'clock tonight. Well, that's not gonna happen with 60 facilities, grain and agronomy facilities throughout 4 states. So it's nice to have a determining factor for him to go in and plan his millwrights and where they're gonna be. Then he works with our directors or our senior location managers and plans out that work. So I think it's important to have some type of tracking control mechanism, and we use Zendesk. It works for us pretty well. Now, we don't expect them to do everything. There are things that we do internally at each of the location. It's hard. We talked about it. I think all of us are probably looking at folks coming back to the cooperative system. It's not 25 years ago where it's farm kids coming home and they know where the dipstick is or what a dipstick is, right? It just isn't happening, but that doesn't mean that they're not valuable employees to us. So we have some training programs. We do some things in maintenance. We have a hot training program every year, hands-on training. We do that with agronomy and grain guys. Some of the things you might be doing is belt splicing, how to check bearings. We talked a little bit about it. We train on gearbox oil analysis and how we do those. We do IR scans of electric buckets. We have those ourselves to do the infrared. And then we also do some vibration analysis or work with companies, to do that for us as well. So we bring all of our staff in. That's about 321 people over the course of 2 weeks, a week of grain focus and a week of agronomy focus. And of course, there's people that come in and help with that. A lot of vendors are part of that. We might have Ecolab come in and talk about pest management. We might have BCI, and then just for anybody that I'm talking about, vendors come in and do a belt splice for us. The railroad will come in and talk to us about rail maintenance. Even though we only have 3 shuttle loaders, you'd be amazed at how many people that we share back and forth on rail and how important it is. We get crazy and we invite the highway patrol in. Think about that. And it is amazing what we learn from them. And they're happy to come in. They want to be part of that. They want to talk to us about DOT inspections of what we miss. So we go that far in all of our maintenance, and maintenance just isn't the facility itself. We talked about rolling stock, and that's why I bring some of those things up. All of those things are included in our hands-on training program. We utilize the Jeep's Great Plains hands-on training program. I got to be part of starting that up several years ago with that chapter, and that's morphed into several chapters. Probably some of you guys have them in your areas now. Those are great hands-on training where vendors come in and provide a lot of training for people, and you get to spend a day. It's kind of a perk. It's nice as a frontline employee to be able to go do something besides clean a boot put every day. I think those are important things for us to think about when we have those people. Provide those opportunities for them to see opportunities and growth ahead of them. So what else did I talk about on my list? You know, we're doing inspections. I talked a little bit about it on pre and post. We put a lot of grain on the ground. At one time, MKC had 32 million bushels on the ground. I know there's some companies in here that'd be saying, hot dang, that's awesome. Let me come visit with you after this. We didn't have a wheat harvest like that this year, so it's not gonna happen, but we do pre and post inspections on bunkers, on facilities. We do some of the things. We change, we check gearboxes. We go through and shoot with the infrared. We're doing that defined checklist pre and post harvest, and then we sit down and debrief. And I think that's a kind of a buzzword that used to be very, very popular, and it might have lost a little luster, but it's really come back here recently. I think that's important for us to sit down and talk about post-harvest, what we failed at on the maintenance side, what we succeeded at, and how we can prevent that now that we're getting ready to go into corn and bean harvest here in central Kansas. So those are a few of the things that we do. We use Simon to track all of our equipment. It was very labor intensive at first. Some of my guys were like, what in the heck? We got to get a barcode on every piece of this equipment. But it's really paid off. It's allowed us to track equipment. It gives us notifications on when we need to be doing some type of service or check. And it's just a really cool tool for us to use in maintenance as well. So that's been a good one for us, Brad, and a few of the things that we're doing in central Kansas.
Jeff, a quick question. This one doesn't count because I'm just asking you. Do you guys do your own HAZMAN servicing every year, checking?
That is a great question. We use a couple. We are so spread out that we have 3, I think, different systems. So we have a couple experts in each system. We have 2 guys that have trained and are really good. Blake Rasmussen has come in and actually did training with some of our folks, and I know he's here today. So yes, we do a lot of our own, and our millwrights are trained in it also to do a lot of that.
6 months?
We do it every 6 months. That is correct. And then we actually install a lot of those ourselves as well too now, some of our millwright crews. A couple guys. Yep.
I would maybe just add, so one of the things from Cargill, so we've had a training center for years, kind of a place for new supervisors. Originally, it was designed as a place for new supervisors to go to kind of learn how to be a supervisor and kind of this immersed training. They got to meet their peers and so on. This is maybe 10 years ago, probably more than that now, actually. The person that leads that group put together what he called the craft skills, and so he started to say, how do we take those people out of the plant that are doing maintenance, give them those skills that maybe they don't have. I think about our changing workforce today. I mean, we talked about that a little bit as a group here earlier, that we have a lot of people coming into the business that have no experience in our business, no experience in our industry. And so, they're starting really from square one. So how do you start to help build that competency in people where they might not even know what a bucket elevator is, right? When they come in, how does it work? And so, the craft skills that we've instituted has been really important in terms of building that competency, building the skills in that group.
I think one thing we touched base on it before with all this, where you talked about I talked about documenting your housekeeping. Everything that you document, your preventive maintenance, figure out a way, and there's all sorts of different systems and different companies, and they'll work different, but find one that works for you so all those records can be retained some way. And it's a lot easier if you do it on a computer than with paper. Have a standard where all that information is uploaded, and when there is an incident, which there will be, that you can pull that all back up and get it to your inspector or your insurance agent or whoever it is, get it to them quickly and accurately. So develop that kind of system. And then I think I just looked out and saw Joe, it made me think about it. Develop the training program for all this too. Again, there's several companies out there. Find some way to have consistent training so that training is done. Because I know for sure when they come out, if you've had an incident, they're going to ask you about your training.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, the safety made simple and things like that. There's just great opportunities to do some training online and have that documented and kept. I mean, the days of paper, they're really going away really, really quick. And I know we have a lot of country elevators. We have a lot of rural communities that it's tough to do some of those things. But, man, the investment really pays off for you if you have one inspection or OSHA walks in the door and you need to provide that stuff really quickly. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. You know, I'm not here to sell that product whatsoever, but I would tell you it's pretty feasible, and what it can do for you in the long run with the partners is amazing. So I think it's a great point.
And like you say, there's different systems, like, you know, the ones that if you run in a train loader that are pretty, you know, pretty expensive, could cost $20,000 a year to have the, and run it. But then there's some other ones out there that can do almost the same thing, but just not as slick, for $75, $100 a user. And, you know, you got to look and see what'll work for you and find the people, and then have somebody designated to do it. That's like every program we've talked about here, housekeeping, maintenance, and everything will start to slide over time. If you don't stay right on it, it'll slide, and in 2 years you're gonna go, gee, I think we used to do all that stuff, but we don't anymore. Why don't we? Well, because somebody wasn't put in charge of making sure you keep doing it. And it's just human nature to let things slide. You get busy, and you've got to make sure you keep up on that some way.
For companies that are thinking about making that transition from the paper maintenance logs to more of electronic format, what can you recommend? I mean, there's a lot of time commitment up front, you know, how to minimize some of those upfront headaches and prevent people from giving up.
Well, first and foremost, you need to find somebody passionate about it. I'm not saying that we aren't all passionate or care about safety, but there are people that are passionate about safety, and there's probably a bunch of you in this room. I look around and I see lots of faces that I know that have come and spoke to me and helped create a safety culture in my mind and with my company. So, I mean, Brad, you got to have passion, and then Chuck alluded to it. You better put somebody in charge of it, and you better hold them accountable, because it's important. If you get into this programs and you don't do it and you don't monitor it, it just becomes another task. And these are important things. These are things that we need to make sure that we're getting training accomplished. Some of it's required training. I mean, I'll just talk. I mean, this isn't on the maintenance side, but we do all of our drug and alcohol abuse training on there, our sexual harassment training on there. I mean, HR has got into this and really got involved with some of these different programs that you can utilize, and it's an important part to them. So it doesn't have to be a human resources person. It just has to be one person that'll hold people accountable and be passionate about it. That'll save you a lot of headaches.
And we say it's hard to find a guy to push a broom or sweep out a pit anymore, but we all say there's a lot of people that like playing on a computer. Yeah. And that's what a lot of it is somebody, you're going to give them all the information and say input it. And once you get it up and going, you know, the monthly time to put it in isn't huge. They're all set up to be pretty efficient. We're just switching from one system to another right now, and that's taken some time. But they understand you want to do that, and you want to keep all those records. So it's not terrible. It needs to be done, and you need to designate somebody to do it.
Yeah, I think a lot about, you know, just having that system. I mean, the technology certainly helps, but it just, you know, builds that accountability that, you know, there's a business case for that, right? I mean, you think about a stable plant is a safe plant, it serves the customer well and consistently, and so, you know, that investment in that technology and that system and discipline around using it, there's a business case to be had there.
Back to a comment earlier, Jeff, about doing IR scans and samples on oil on your gearboxes. Obviously, you're not going to treat a country elevator the same as you would a shuttle loader. How do you think about the frequency of testing?
Yeah, our shuttle loaders, of course. I mean, I wrote it down here because I always have to remember it. But I mean, they're done maintenance off run times, hour times. It's made simple for you. Anybody can look at that screen and be able to do those type of things because they have technology. A country house a little bit different. So I think most of the guys are checking their gearbox oil a couple times a year. Looking at it, sending it off for analysis. You know, we partner with a large company that'll do that for us in our energy side. On the IR scans, it's not quite as frequent, or the vibration testing. Usually when we get time and downtime is kind of where we're at on that. A lot of times when the millwrights have times to come around and do that, it's probably not quite as much consistent as we should be doing on that, but it's done yearly. there probably could be some more value in doing that a little bit more often on our side.
And that's what these programs can do, like where you maybe get the ones with a few more bells and whistles. The one we're setting up, we can set it up so we have different intervals of greasing machines depending on whether it's off season or we're coming into harvest or it is harvest. We can set that up on a calendar, and we're getting to the point, it'll be so we'll have a QR code out on that leg. The maintenance guy will go out, take a scan of the QR code, he'll know what he's supposed to do on it. He'll be able to record that he did it, and it'll be done. There won't be any paper, and it'll all be recorded. And one of the things, like you said, Jeff, we aren't, at Michigan Ag Commodities, we aren't quite a country elevator, but we have a lot of 6-7 million bushel houses and a 15 million bushel house, but we haven't gone and got that mill rights. We played with it a couple times, but we haven't done it. So the things that you're doing, like the near infrared thermography and the vibration analysis and stuff, we've gone out and hired that done. And we also were asked a question about the HAZMON. We've hired that done. We first had them put in and we didn't have somebody monitor them. We came back and we saw some were jumped out and some were unplugged and all this, and we went back to that. Now we've got that every 6 months with one company that comes around. And we haven't analyzed it whether it would be cheaper to have our own in-house or not. I'm sure at some time we'll keep looking at that. But at this present time with the labor and stuff, we just decided we had good companies, people that we trust, that we could have do it, and it just made more sense for us to hire them, write the check once, and have it done right.
Any questions on maintenance for the group? Okay, well, if not, maybe it's a good time to switch into dust hazard analysis. Chuck?
Yeah, well, I'm Chuck Kunisch, and from Michigan Ag Commodities. For years, I ran a couple of our facilities over in the thumb of Michigan, and about 6, 7, I don't know, could be 8 years ago, our safety director, I usually just can talk loud enough, I don't even worry about it, but our safety director resigned, and I raised my hand to fill in for a short period of time, and I became an interim safety director, a temporary safety director, a full-time, and now I'm the corporate safety director. And probably in some ways, we always talk about safety directors, are they better if they have been trained in safety, or whether they're better trained in grain. I was just trained in doing stuff very unsafe and hazardous. I just got the job done. And so I think it does give me a unique insight on how to do it. And also when you have your fellow facility managers that now hate your guts, tell you you can't do something, you can say, yes, you can. I've done it. And at some point along the way, I drank the Kool-Aid, and I made that switch from just being all-encompassing, get the job done, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, into safety is very important. And it wasn't a revelation or an epiphany or anything like that, but I did feel it's important, and if I can do it, I can guarantee anybody can do it. So, and then currently, I'm stepping away from managing those facilities. I'm the full-time corporate sector, safety director. I have Brandon here in the back of the room that works at one of our other facilities that's working and training and going to take over for me eventually. And this year I was elected as president of Jeeps, so I get this one opportunity here. Thanks everybody for coming. Jeeps really appreciates it. But a lot of my time is going to be involved in that. I'm also from Jeeps on the board of NGFA, specialty soybeans, so I'm going to be doing more of that, but still stay involved in safety because, believe it or not, I really enjoy it now. I never thought I would, but I did. And it really, to me, it can sound a little bit rote, but we take great pride in getting everybody home safe and alive every night. And if I can do that for our facility, that's great, but also for our customers. I'm really involved in trying to, because we see, even though we aren't getting entrapped as much in the grain our elevators, or we aren't blowing up as many, our customers are killing themselves right and left. And so I'm taking that to try to do something like these guys have done with their own companies, but do it in Michigan maybe as a statewide initiative to have a training facility. So I feel very strongly about that. Jess asked me to talk on this on dust hazard assessments. And if you guys do whatever these guys just told you and do everything right, I don't have to talk about anything. If you control your dust and you maintain your facility, it's not an issue. There are some people out here, I'm not by any means an expert. Tim that spoke this morning was the expert, and I was going to rely on him, but he left. So we do have some other people here, and if somebody says, oh, Chuck, whatever you're talking about, you're full of crap, I could be. I hope I've got it right, but if you feel that I'm telling you something wrong, please ask in. So, who's required to do a dust hazard assessment? Pretty much anybody that generates dust, whether it's grain dust, plastic dust, metal dust, any kind of dust, you've got to do it. And we're supposed to have it done by 2022. So I don't know if like we've talked a couple times, show of hands, I know the majority of people, if I've asked if they've done theirs, wouldn't raise their hand in here. So there's still a big job there. And why do we need to do dust hazard assessments? There's a couple reasons. Probably the best maybe is so we don't blow ourselves and our customers and our employees up. That's pretty important. But also now there's a requirement to do it. And if they're giving us, since like I say, it was 2022, we've got a lot of leeway on doing them. But at some time, somebody's going to start coming around and asking you more if you've got them done. Who requires the DHA to be done? And I hope everybody was here this morning for Tim. He explained that, but it's a person of authority. What does that mean? It could be your state fire marshal. It could be your local fire marshal. And what happened with Michigan Ag back before 2022, I think I was at a Jeeps or NGF. It could have been at Convey or Country Elevator. And I listened to a talk, and they said, you've got to start doing this. And at that time, I called the company that we were using for our safety programs, and they did dust hazards assessment training. So I went down did a class and for a week on doing the dust hazard assessments. And a lot of it was the metals and the plastics and stuff, so it wasn't what I would be doing. But I looked at it and said, hey, we could do that. Well, when I came back, talked to some people around, and they said, well, you really don't have to do that because nobody in authority has told you to do that. So I went to my company and said, hey, I think I could do these. I probably need a little further training, but we really don't have to do it. So our company looked at it and said, well, if we don't have to do it, we aren't going to do it, which was all fine and dandy for, I don't know how many, 6, 7 years, till about a year ago. Our insurance company came out and said, have you done dust hazard assessment? We said, no, we're sort of working at it, but we haven't done it. And they said, well, you really should. We said, okay. And then we looked it up, but they aren't a person of authority. So, okay, well, we don't have to do it. Well, we found out later, and we're going through it right now for us, and it was one of the questions I was going to ask, but it's just flowing in, Brad. So, last year, they came and said, well, you haven't done your dust hazard assessment. We aren't a person of authority, but we can drop you. And this is a big insurance company that is well known. And we thought we had it okay because we had pretty much a stellar liability record of not destroying much. We didn't blow up stuff. And we thought we were safe. And I think, Jeff, I talked to you last year, your boss, and stuff. And he said, oh, all they want to do is they're going through and sort of going to stop, fire everybody, and then take back half of them at double the rate, have less liability. And it all had to do with the derechos that went through and a couple of elevators that got blown up in the last year. And these insurance companies had way more liability out there than they thought. Leading up to this, they'd asked me to do an assessment of our equipment that they had. And every elevator, every grain leg I had was a 15-foot grain leg. Somebody had given an agent or somebody had given them that information, and that's what they based our premiums on. and we had to go through it. So they had been looking at it. Say they took some severe losses, so they were looking at it. And we thought, well, okay, you know, we'll probably get taken back, but it's gonna, you know, be at a higher rate, that's for sure. But it wasn't. They dropped us. We were done, and we had to go out and find new insurance company, and that was not easy, and it's very expensive. So I would say, even if you're secure with, you don't have a person of authority telling you to do it, you probably really should look at it, because probably your insurance company will start coming asking questions too. So that's really how we got involved in it. And who requires the DHA to be done? Well, it's in the NFPA, and you know, they talked about this morning. Are we 252? Are we 260? It's all sort of in flux. But NFPA is the one that makes the rules, and then OSHA, or in our case, MIOSHA, sets a standard that says you need to do it. So it's going to be something that you're going to have to do, and you need to get going at it. And there's a standard on the, you know, fundamentals of combustible dust in 652, so that's a good place to start reading that, get yourself acquainted with it. Tim today did a great job this morning explaining what needed to be done, and you just need to start on it. So both the OSHA and state OSHA. So now who can do the DHA? Like I say, when we started, I went and looked and took the training, felt that I probably could do it, but I would have wanted to try to get a little bit more experience to make sure I was doing it right. But there's also more and more private companies doing it. But you need to look at that, because what they do for you and the cost of it will vary a lot. Like Tim said this morning, from $5,000–6,000 up to $15,000–$20,000 for a facility. And we looked at it, and we didn't really think with the real expensive ones, at least for us, that we needed all the bells and whistles. So we went with the one that wasn't expensive, a company that's very well respected in the industry, and we had them done. We got all our DHA reports. We had to do probably more work with that. There was a lot of prep for that we had to get him and them the records of everything that they needed. So I spent, and Brandon spent a lot of time getting all those records ready for them, where if you probably hired the more expensive one, they would just come in and get them all done. So you've got to have somebody that can spend some time doing that. So then there's really 7 steps. Do we have any questions at this point, or 5 minutes to go? Oh, crap.
Well, I just want to, hey, Chuck, I just want to clarify one point. So federal OSHA doesn't mandate that you have to do a DHA, right? So it's solely the authority having jurisdiction, as you mentioned. So federal OSHA.
But they have a standard.
They have the grain handling standard, but that does not require a DHA. So the DHA is only for, like you described, if it's a local fire department, if it's the state fire commission, insurance commission, but federal OSHA cannot come in and say, you need to do a DHA. That's, not now, I don't think Michigan OSHA's changed their standard, but that's solely that's solely the grain handling standard applies to the grain feed and processing facilities. So just, if OSHA says that, I would say, talk with an attorney, because I think you may be able to contest that.
They really haven't, but the whole thing still, I'm still pretty confused about it when you go through all the different standards and who can and who can't.
Well, exactly, and I think that's why I wanted to have Tim explain that too. I just want to make sure everyone understands that the insurance company, if they say, and you know what, and I'd be happy, I know we did, maybe I'll talk with Grain Journal, because I wrote an article about this, but it's the same thing. It's like there's a lot of confusion here on who can and can't tell you to do this.
So if the state fire marshal tells you you have to do it, do they have the authority to fine you if you don't?
Yes, so that they are the authority having jurisdiction. So if a state insurance commission or state fire commission, if they say that you need to basically incorporate this NFPA standard for us to respond to an incident at your facility, you would be required to do so. If your insurance carrier says you need to do this, and you don't, and then they drop you, well, then that's the issue between you and the insurance carrier, right? But federal OSHA, they don't have the authority to do that because they would have to incorporate by reference the standard, which is why we're having a discussion about all this today, because it's a very confusing topic, and I know there's a lot of questions about it, but I just want to make sure. I know we got limited time, but I just want to
I
clarify
know, like,
that.
when we sat in the safety and health meeting the other day, even the major players in the grain industry are sort of confused by it too, so I'm not alone. Okay, well, I've got the 5-minute signal, which now is down, so I'm going to have to sort of rush through, but again, if you still have a question, either we can talk about it afterwards or we can just stay a little bit longer. But there's really 7 steps needed to complete the DHA. You need to acquire documentation. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff to gather that you need to have to do it right. You need to acquire that documentation, either if you're doing it yourself or if you're having it done. You need to field verify. You need to make sure what all the stuff was in that communications or documentation that you acquired is really the way it is out in your plant. You know, you could have documentation that says there's a plant there and that thing could be gone, or you could have no documentation on a new plant. So you really need to figure out what the scope of it is. You field verify that, and then you need to assemble your dust hazard assessment team, which if you're doing it yourself, it could be who's ever doing it, facility managers that could be involved, that could help with it. With us hiring a consultant, it was myself and our vice president of operations and my assistant safety that really was the team to put it together, and went and decided everything that we were going to do and then helped them when they came. They all need to evaluate the hazards and evaluate compliance. What's it going to take to fix that? Like I say, it could be just as much if you got to place a leg that's leaking dust to fix the leg. Or it might be that, you know, it could be the recommendation could be that you need to take out the belt and put in a covered conveyor. You need to determine the explosive dust, lab test if necessary. Most of the stuff that's out here, the soybeans, corn, wheat, all have standards that have been done before. We ran into, because we handle dry beans, and we ran into the issue that they didn't have them on record. There's a place you can go online and have all the documentation of all the standards for the explosiveness, but they didn't do it. So then we went ahead and did a go, no-go test, which wasn't too much, and come to find out that dry beans do have explosive characteristics. And one of the things I found interesting there is they are explosive, but the different standards that they have for explosiveness, which I don't understand them all, they weren't really high on that. But I found out that the sugar company down in Savannah, when they blow up sugar dust, doesn't have a high explosive, but it builds pressure, and that's what blew up that one. So just because they aren't highly explosive doesn't mean they can't destroy stuff. So we had to go out and we found out it's different between if it's black beans or navy beans. And so we had to go out and test those, and that's pretty expensive. So if you can find somebody else that's in the same industry and get their numbers, that'll be good. I'm giving them out to other people that are doing dry beans in Michigan, so they don't have to have those costs. You have to prioritize the hazards. You have to look at where things are leaking dust that could blow up, document the results, and then you need to repeat it every 5 years, or if you change the system, you need to reevaluate and do another update your DHA. We done? Okay, that's fine. I can quit anytime. Okay. So.
And I was just going to add to that, there's the appendix in 61 that has all of the values of all those products. So the KST value, and according to OSHA, if anything's above 0, it's explosive. So it doesn't matter if the KST value is 1, it's considered an explosive item, just like you're describing with the beans. So that would be a place where there's a lot of the updated
I would say
versions.
I was surprised because in Michigan and like out in Mindac, there's a lot of dry bean facilities, and I was really surprised to find out that that number wasn't around.
Any questions before we turn it back over?
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. I thought it was another great discussion, so thank you, gentlemen. So now we're going to take a 30-minute break until 4 o'clock before we'll come back here for our final discussion. So we'll see everybody in the trade show room.